Other questions? Okay, if not, let me start. Okay. So last time we had derived some conditions for successful inflation. So let me list those again.
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
from the conditions we have on the potential for the inflation,
Yes.
it does not necessarily mean that the potential should have a minimum, right?
Well, not necessarily, but eventually it has to end, right? It has to settle down somewhere.
I mean, for the equations of motion, maybe for a physical solution, we can demand that.
Yes.
But otherwise, there is nothing that stops perpetual sort of rolling or anything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't want it in our universe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The point is, of course, if you have infinite rolling, right, eventually energy density will go to negative infinity.
Yeah.
Right, if he continues to decrease. And that's not the kind of universe we are living in, right? But in principle, yes, you can certainly do that.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't sufficiently narrowed down the class of potentials in that sense, I was saying.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there is a wide class of potentials. In fact, it is possible to narrow it down from other constants, but just these constants themselves will not narrow down the choice of potential.
But we do indeed want to, right? In the sense that we want a specific, like, as narrow class of potentials.
Yeah, I agree. That's if you want to go from the bottom up, right? Or you can ask that if there is a fundamental theory, right? Whether you can derive a potential from there which will fit these constraints.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so they are both approaches, and presumably, I mean, eventually, if we learn what kind of potential we have to combine the two, right? You have to know from bottom up as well as from top down.
Yeah, all right.
Okay, any other question?
So in the calculation, the value of capital G, like we are taking equals to 1 or like 6.67, the standard value?
So far, we have not said anything, but eventually we'll take it equal to 1. Right now, the H bar and C I have taken equal to 1, right? I'm not keeping track of the H bar and C, but G is still there. I mean, I have kept all the factors of G.
And the value of the initial field and the final field, it depends on us, like appropriate choice.
Yeah, so given a potential, you have to see what range of phi satisfies those conditions.
Okay.
Right?
We have to decide it.
Well, you have to check that.
Okay.
I mean, given a potential, what range of phi I and phi f, the initial and the final values, satisfy conditions for slow roll inflation.
Okay,
right?
okay.
That's all we will define as the start and the end of the inflation.
Okay.
Right?
But
so
the initial value of the phi, I think it's not defined as you told earlier.
Yeah, it's not defined, but at least it has to be that much amount so that all the conditions are satisfied.
Okay.
Right? Otherwise, the initial value, yes, you can change, and nothing we observe today will really depend on that initial value, because as we discussed, the inflation basically erases anything that happened early in the history of the universe.
Okay, sir. Okay.
So as long as you have enough inflation, then inflation basically erases everything.
Okay.
Sir, but we need to impose more constraints if we want to describe the reheating phase, right?
Yes, indeed. So I'll discuss the reheating, and also, I mean, the fluctuations that you see. Right? That, in fact, is the strongest constant. The fluctuations that we see today in the microwave background, expansion of those put the strongest constant on the kind of potential we can have. But you are right, that reheating is also one important aspect, which is something that we'll discuss today. Okay, how the potential affects the reheating. Any other question? Okay, so let me then remind you the conditions for successful inflation. And we had stated all these conditions in terms of the potential. So the first was that V prime phi square should be less than 24 pi g times V phi square. Then V double prime phi. These factors of 24, you shouldn't worry too much because we are talking about much less than this anyway. So let me write it, 8 pi g times V phi. So these two are slow roll conditions. They came from slow roll. Then we have the condition that coming from the requirement that the inflation lasts for sufficiently long period. Okay, so that we have the appropriate number of E folding. And assuming that we need 60 E folding, we had gotten this relation phi I to phi f. Is greater than 60. So this number can change to something else depending on the scale of inflation. And then we had this condition that V of phi during inflation should be much less than m Planck to the 4, and which in the unit that we are using, h bar and c equal to 1, this is like g to the minus 2. And as we discussed last time, okay, I just mentioned, but I didn't do the analysis, that this by itself doesn't put very strong restriction on the potential. Even very simple kind of potential can satisfy all these. So we gave one class of examples. So try V of phi equal to some constant g times phi to the alpha, okay, where this is a constant, alpha is a constant. And then let's translate these various conditions and see what we get. Okay, so I'll do that here. So one, V prime phi, say V prime phi will have a g times alpha times phi to the alpha. So one gives you g square alpha square phi to the power 2 alpha minus 2 is much less than 24 pi g times V of phi square. So that's g square phi to the 2 alpha. So you see that g cancels, and this translates to phi square should be much larger than alpha square over 24 pi g. Okay. 2 gives a similar relation. Okay, so 2 second derivative makes this into g times alpha minus 1 times phi to the alpha minus 2. Okay, so that's again a condition on phi square. Okay, so let me just write it down. So phi square much greater than alpha times alpha minus 1 over 8 pi g. Three, okay, also can be worked out easily. So V of phi over V prime of phi, right? V of phi is this, V prime of phi will be g times phi to the alpha minus 1. So there is a alpha in the denominator. So you get minus 8 pi g. So the alpha over alpha. Okay, let me write the alpha here. And then you have phi d phi. Okay, because V prime of phi is alpha to the phi to the alpha minus 1, V of phi is phi to the alpha. So you get a net factor of phi d phi. So that gives you half of phi f square minus phi I square. So this should be much larger than 60. And this essentially should be turned around. So if you write it as plus, then it's phi I square minus phi f square. So let me do that. So let me turn this into plus and this into minus and this into plus. So this basically says that the phi I should be larger than phi f. Okay, that's because of the choice of the potential, right? Because the rolling is always from larger value of potential to smaller value. So you start from a larger value and then roll to a smaller value. Now, one point to note about this 1, 2, and 3, these conditions, is that they don't involve G. Okay, they don't involve G. And all of these conditions can be satisfied by taking phi to be sufficiently large. Okay? As long as you take phi I to be sufficiently large, okay, and phi f also to be sufficiently large, you can satisfy all of these conditions. So the fourth condition V of phi is much less than g to the minus 2. That says that g square phi to the alpha, sorry, g phi to the alpha should be much less than g to the minus 2. So this is the only thing which could possibly put an upper bound on phi, right? That phi cannot be very large. But this can be compensated by taking g to be small. Okay? So this can be satisfied. So using this 1, 2, and 3, you determine how large phi has to be. Okay, so has to satisfy this. And however large phi is, okay, this you can always satisfy by taking g to be small. So you see that this simple kind of potential can give rise to inflation. Okay? And even alpha equal to 2, okay? Even half m square phi square, you can do it. For small enough m. Now, there is one possible issue that one has to worry about. So, one possible issue that since we need to take phi to be large, if V of phi contains other terms, with larger powers of phi, they could violate these conditions. So for example, as long as you have just half m square phi square, you can take phi to be sufficiently large and achieve this for small enough m. But you may worry that if there is a small lambda phi to the 4 kind of coupling, then as phi has to be taken large, the lambda phi to the 4 could dominate over the half m square phi square term. And that could cause potential violation of this. So you have to make sure, we need to make sure that the potential is of a certain kind. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen. Okay, is this clear? Are there questions?
Sir, isn't it the other way around, that we should reject the area where phi is such that V of phi is large and not do physics there?
Yes.
Because we don't know.
Yeah. So if, see, it's not a question of just V of phi becoming large. Right? Even, what may happen is that even if V of phi is not large, some of these conditions may undergo change, right? Because you have computed this V prime phi, etc., assuming there's this form of the potential. So you can say that, okay, if there are such terms, if those terms become dominant, then you shouldn't do physics there. But again, typically what happens is even in a given microscopic theory, you calculate the potential from some principle. And then you try to test if that potential satisfies the conditions for inflation. And these are all the conditions you have to satisfy, but you also have to make sure that the possible corrections to the potential that the microscopic theory may give you does not become important during inflation. Right? Otherwise, you have to redo this analysis by taking into account those effects. If you are going from bottom up, right, then you can always say, okay, I just choose my potential this way. Okay, I just don't add anything to the any higher order terms, and then of course you can at least satisfy these conditions. Something else may fail, but at least these conditions can be satisfied.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, so now let me discuss the question of reheating. So we had described, we had discussed this earlier, that at the end of inflation, okay, if you plot V versus phi, there is this flat part, okay, and then it goes down, phi settles to this minimum. Okay. So this is the general picture. So this point where the phi starts rolling fast, this is the beginning of reheating. Okay. So technically, we can define the beginning of reheating to be the time when the slow roll condition fails. Okay, because then the universe is not expanding exponentially anymore. Okay, it's still expanding, but that exponential expansion, okay, dependent on that satisfying the slow roll condition, that doesn't happen anymore. Okay. So then the field starts oscillating around the minimum. Okay. So let's approximate the potential. Okay, again, this is not strictly necessary. Okay, let's approximate. Potential as V of phi. Call this capital M. During reheating. Okay, of course, this is not strictly true, but we assume that this roll starts rolling fast and it starts oscillating around the minimum, okay, where you can only keep this quadratic term. Now, for this, we had worked out earlier the contribution to the energy momentum tensor. So if you remember, okay, this is, we discussed this in the context of axionic dark matter, okay, but the mathematics, of course, is the same. So rho was half phi dot square plus half m square. This time we have phi minus phi naught square, and p is half phi dot square minus half m square phi minus phi naught square. And as in the case of axionic dark matter, you can see that the expectation value of p is 0, okay, where expectation value refers to the value of p over one, averaged over one oscillation period. So this then behaves like a non-relativistic matter. Okay, so the cosmological constant gets converted to non-relativistic matter. And we had earlier discussed the physical interpretation, again in the context of axionic dark matter. That these actually represent large collection of almost zero momentum phi particle. And this almost zero momentum essentially follows from the fact that the phi has been smoothened out. Okay, so the spatial gradients have gone to zero. Okay. So that means that the classical coherent state that you build are mostly out of the zero momentum particles. But this is of course not what you want, right? This is not the beginning of the FRW universe, right? Because FRW universe at small lambda should be radiation dominated. Okay, and the radiation should contain standard model particles, but there may be other particles as well, okay, depending on how many light particles were there at that time. So you have to find a mechanism by which this energy density of the phi particle gets eventually converted to radiation, okay, because only then we can say that the FRW standard FRW universe has begun. Okay. So need to transfer the energy density, transfer the energy density to radiation, which includes standard model particles. So the way this is achieved is to assume that there is phi has some additional coupling. So we assume that phi has coupling. Yes, go ahead, please.
Sir, up to this point, we can say there is no concept of particle.
No, there is concept of phi particle still, because you can think of the phi as a classical field rolling, but you can also equally well think of this as a collection of large number of zero momentum phi particles. Right? Just like the axionic dark matter, we could think of this as a rolling field, but you can also think of this as a large number of almost zero momentum axion particles.
Okay.
So in this sense, you can think of this as a large number of phi particles. But you can
Okay.
also think of this as a classical phi field that is rolling around its minimum.
Okay, sir.
Any other question? So we'll assume that the phi has coupling to standard model particles. It can also have coupling to other particles, and you can also consider a more complicated scenario where phi couples to something else other than the standard model particles, and those themselves may have coupling to standard model particles. But this is the simplest situation that phi has coupling to standard model particles. And as a result, phi is unstable and can decay to light particles, okay, which includes standard model particles, but as I said, it could include also other particles if they're present. So let's denote by gamma as the total decay rate of phi. Okay. So we assume that phi decays to radiation, okay, and gamma is the total decay rate of phi into radiation. And the question will be to, our goal will be to try to set up an equation that tells us that how the energy density of radiation varies as a function of time, okay, given gamma. So if this is the decay rate of phi, then the energy density, okay, the during reheating, the energy density rho phi will go as rho f times lambda f over lambda cube times e to the minus gamma t minus t. Okay. So f here refers to the end of inflation or the beginning of reheating. So if the phi had been stable, then the energy density of phi will go inversely proportional to 1 over lambda cube because it's non-relativistic matter. But because phi decays, okay, the actual energy density has this additional exponential fall off term, okay, because gamma is the rate of decay. Okay, so this is the way the energy density of phi will evolve as a function of time. Okay. And we will assume that whatever it loses, it gets converted to radiation. Is this clear? Are there questions? Okay. So let's try to set up with this equation another equation that tells us how the energy density of radiation changes as a function of time. Okay, so given this, okay, we have this following equation. We have ddt of rho phi times lambda cube as minus gamma times rho phi times lambda cube. Okay, this just follows from the equation here. You can see if you multiply by lambda cube, okay, then this becomes rho phi lambda cube. This is rho f lambda f cube times this, and then if you take the ddt of that, you bring down a factor of minus gamma, okay, times the same thing. So that's what I have written here. ddt of rho phi lambda cube is given by minus gamma times rho phi lambda cube. Okay. So it basically means that the total amount of energy density in phi in a co-moving volume decays with rate gamma. Okay, the actual energy density, of course, falls off faster because of this expansion of the universe. So let's suppose that rho r is the energy density of radiation. Rho r of t is the energy density of radiation. So then we have this equation, the ddt. Okay, this is the energy conservation equation. So total energy density is rho r plus rho phi. So this should follow the energy conservation equation. So that's minus 3 lambda square lambda dot times the pressure. So that's T phi plus PR. And P phi, of course, is 0. Okay, so this is 0. And this is rho r over 3. So this gives you minus lambda square lambda dot rho r. So using this, let's try to set up the appropriate equation. So you see here you have d dt of rho r lambda cube. So let's multiply by, okay, so let me write this equation this way. Okay, so d dt of rho r lambda cube plus lambda square lambda dot rho r is minus d dt of rho phi lambda cube. Okay, and for this I substitute here d dt of rho phi lambda cube is this. So that's gamma times rho phi lambda cube. Okay, and then now I'm going to substitute for rho phi lambda cube. So this is, okay, so let me do this almost. So this side, okay, I can write as d dt of rho r lambda to the 4 times 1 over lambda of t. Okay, you can easily convince yourself of this because there's a, if you write this lambda to the 4 as lambda cube times lambda, you get d dt of rho r lambda cube. Okay, and then lambda cancels with this, and then you have rho r lambda cube times d dt of lambda, that's lambda dot, and that basically gives rise to this term. Okay, the lambda cube cancels the 1 over lambda to give lambda square times lambda dot. Okay, so this is 1 over lambda times d dt of this. And on the right hand side, gamma rho phi lambda cube, I'm going to substitute for rho phi lambda cube whatever we had here. So that's gamma times rho f lambda f cube e to the power minus gamma t minus tf. Okay, that's what this is. So rho phi lambda cube should have been rho f lambda f to the lambda f cube if it was conserved, but because of this decay, there is an exponential factor. So this tells us that rho r lambda cube, lambda to the 4, okay, so let me write in one step. Okay, so rho r of t is, these are all constants, gamma rho f lambda f cube. Then you have a 1 over lambda t to the 4. So lambda t to the minus 4. And then you have to take this lambda on this other side and integrate. Okay, I've just done two things at one step. So this is from tf to t to the power minus gamma t prime minus tf lambda of t prime dt. Is this point clear?
Sir, lambda t to the power minus 4, I think, will be inside the integral or not?
No, it will not be inside the integral because what I did is I wrote rho r times lambda to the 4 as the integral, right? Okay, let me do this in two steps. I think this is, I did it in two steps. So this, I wrote this first as rho r lambda to the 4 as equal to gamma rho f lambda f cube times integral tf to t e to the minus gamma.
Okay, I got it, sir. Yes.
Yeah, lambda t prime dt prime. And then I took the lambda to the 4 to the other side.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So this tells us how to determine rho for a given lambda, and of course the lambda equation we can solve by Friedmann equation. So this gives a coupled set of differential equations, so you can solve it to find how rho r changes as a function of time. But let me just give the some general properties. So first you see that rho r of course is 0 at t equal to tf, right? Because at tf by definition everything is in the matter. Okay, so rho r is 0 at t equal to tf. And you can also see that rho r falls off rapidly for large t because of this lambda t to the minus 4 term. Okay, this of course for large t this integral approaches finite value, right? Because after all there is a exponential suppression, right? So for t prime larger than gamma inverse, this is exponentially suppressed. So for large t, basically this integral can replace from tf to infinity, and that's a finite result. So for large t, we expect rho r to fall off as 1 over lambda to the 4. And at t equal to tf, this is 0. So if you plot rho r versus t, rho r, then at tf it starts being 0. Okay, it increases and then it falls off again. Okay, for large t, because it goes as 1 over lambda to the 4. So you see that there is some point where rho r reaches a maximum. Okay, so let me call this rho r max. Rho r max is the other side. This is rho r max. So we define the reheating temperature TR such that half AB TR to the 4 and n is the effective number of degrees of freedom, is rho r max. Okay, and you remember we counted 1 per boson and 7, 8 per formula. 1 per boson and 7, 8 per formula. Okay, so this was the formula for the radiation energy density in terms of the temperature. So we equate that reheating temperature as the maximum temperature it reaches. Okay, the radiation reaches. Okay, and that's fixed. So you calculate rho r max and then you define TR by this equation. So reheating temperature is important is because of the following reason, that if we need some events after inflation, like for example B minus L production, it has to happen at T less than or at TR. So imagine that you have a microscopic theory which has B minus L violation, but that B minus L violation takes place at a very high energy. So if the reheating temperature is below that high energy scale, then the fact that in the microscopic theory you have the possibility of B minus L violation doesn't help, because the temperature will not even rise to that level for B minus L violating interactions to become effective. So when you put everything together, cosmology, this gives a tight constraint on the cosmology that of course individual problems you can solve, right? If you just want to inflate, you can solve it. Okay, you can take reheating temperature to be as low as you like. Okay, presumably above the standard model scale. But if you want to solve all the other problems in cosmology, then things are tightly constrained. Okay, you have to make sure that in doing one thing you don't upset something else. So that puts some in any given microscopic theory, it's a consistency condition that you have to check. That if there is inflation in the microscopic theory, then the reheating temperature must be above the scale so that you can produce B minus L, okay, or anything, and dark matter, for example. Okay, all of these have to happen after below the reheating temperature. So I'll just finish this discussion by discussing two extreme cases, okay, because I wrote down this equation, okay, which in principle can be solved, but I'll just show how the solution works in these two extreme cases.
So could you go back to that last equation for rho?
For rho, yes, I'm going to write this again anyway. This one.
You're saying this goes to 0 for large t because lambda goes to infinity?
That's right, yes. Because the universe is expanding, right?
Yeah.
So for large t, this approach is a constant. Because whether lambda is expanding by radiation domination or matter domination, right? Because of this exponential fall off, clearly for large enough t, it will approach a constant.
Yeah.
And lambda falls off. So that's the reason why it goes to 0 at large t. Okay, and that's the reason why there is a maximum. Is that okay?
Yeah. And also at TF, we are setting lambda to be what, 0 or?
Yes, because the integral, no, I don't have to take lambda to be 0, right? It's the lambda at the end of inflation, whatever it is.
Should it agree with our Big Bang cosmology of?
Yes, of course, it should. Because eventually you have to make sure that the Big Bang cosmology, when you extrapolate, right, then in the radiation dominated era, what you get from inflation should match the radiation dominated universe. Right? So lambda f should be given by what you extrapolate from the Big Bang cosmology. Right? Assuming the lambda is 1 today, we can extrapolate backwards. And this lambda f should match that.
Yeah, but that is 0, right?
No, it is 0 at infinite temperature, right?
Yeah.
So at TR, it should be something. At TR, whatever it is, the extrapolated from Big Bang cosmology, that's what lambda should be at TR. Okay, and then you have to work backwards to see what lambda f should have been.
Okay.
So once the universe has entered the radiation dominated era, then you can match the two solutions, right? The one coming from inflation, okay, and the one coming from Big Bang cosmology, and that's where you have to do the matching. See, lambda for most purposes doesn't really enter the equation very much because it's lambda dot over lambda, right? That's what is important because the overall scale factor is arbitrary, and today we have set it equal to 1 because you want to measure distances in today's metric. So the inflationary part, right, is more or less insensitive to what the overall scale of lambda you take.
Yeah.
Any other question?
So, any photons that is being created during reheating has to be created through like electrons and positrons, right? Or some other particles of standard model.
Yes, indeed.
So, like, how is it happening? Are they colliding and producing photons or what?
Yeah, because at that temperature, right, it's in thermal equilibrium, so it equilibrates very fast. But because the densities are high, okay, even if the reheating temperature is low, I mean, we have seen that the electron interactions don't really decouple, right? Because the electromagnetic interaction is strong enough. So once you produce electrons and positrons, they will annihilate and produce photons.
So at that temperature, they won't annihilate, right?
Well, they will keep annihilating and getting recreated, right? See, they will not annihilate on the average, you can say, once they reach thermal equilibrium. But they are annihilating all the time, right? Thermal equilibrium basically means that you can transfer energy from electrons and positrons to photons very fast.
Yeah.
So the fact that the number densities of electrons, positrons, photons, these are more or less equal, right? Determined by this 7-8 factor or whatever, is because they are continuously annihilating and getting recreated. And that's why the thermal equilibrium formula is valid.
Yeah, okay.
So the reaction rates at that time are really fast because the densities are low, wave densities are high. So it is true that photons may not be produced directly from the 5-particle decay, but they'll be eventually produced very fast once electrons and positrons are produced, or other quarks and antiquarks are produced from this. Okay, any other question? Okay, so let me discuss these two extreme cases. Okay, let me write down the equations first. Okay, I do it here. So rho r was given by gamma rho f lambda f cube lambda t to the minus 4 and integral from tf to t e to the minus gamma t prime minus tf lambda t prime dt. So the case one is, we'll consider that gamma is large. Okay, the decay rate of phi is fast, so gamma say is much larger than h at tf. Okay, it decays faster than the Hubble expansion rate. In that case, we can approximate this, okay, because gamma is very large. Okay, this decays very fast. So rho r, we can basically set t prime equal to tf here and take the lambda out. So rho r becomes gamma rho f lambda f cube times one more lambda comes out from here. Okay, lambda t to the minus 4. Let me write on that. Then you have lambda f, okay, because lambda tf I'm taking out, and then this integral from tf to t e to the minus gamma t prime minus tf dt prime. Okay, I can just take t to be large. Okay, because it's as long as it's large, as long as t minus tf is large compared to gamma inverse. Okay, this approximation is right, and we are assuming gamma to be large. So this we can approximate by 1 over gamma. Okay. So this becomes roughly, okay, rho f lambda f to the 4 lambda t to the minus 4. Okay. So for this case, we see that rho r is maximum at t equal to tf. Okay. Of course, exactly at t equal to tf, it is 0. Okay. But what it is saying is that very soon, okay, after tf, it reaches this kind of fall off, okay, which is the hallmark of radiation dominated, the standard fall off due to radiation. Okay. It's as if at tf, everything got converted to radiation very fast, and it started falling as radiation dominated, as it should in a radiation dominated era during that, from that then onwards. So it's as if the whole energy density is converted to radiation instantaneously. Intuitively, it's clear why this is happening, right? Because if the phi is decaying very fast, then it's in a very short time, the whole of phi decays. Okay, by that time, lambda hasn't expanded very much. So basically, the at t equal to tf is, or t very close to tf, right? T very close to tf is when rho r reaches its maximum. Okay, because after that it starts falling off as 1 over lambda to the 4. And of course, if you want to make systematic corrections, you can do it based on this formula. Okay, so you can, let me write this here. Okay, that this is of course very simple, but we can carry out systematic expansion in 1 over gamma. In 1 over gamma possible. Are there questions? The The second case is the opposite limit. Okay, so first let me write the formula again. So rho r is gamma rho f lambda f cube So the second case is when gamma is much less than the expansion rate, the Hubble H at TF. In this case, the phi is decaying very slowly. And so what we can do is we can just replace this gamma by 0. Okay, the leading to leading order, we can just set this equal to 1. So rho r can be approximated as gamma rho f lambda f cube lambda t to the minus 4, and then tf to t lambda t prime dt prime. Now, here, because the decay is very slow, the universe will remain matter dominated for most of the time, okay, because it's not converting to radiation very fast. Now, let's recall that in a matter dominated universe, lambda dot over lambda square, this will be given by 8 pi g over 3. And here, most of the energy density is remaining in matter. So let me just write this as rho f lambda f cube lambda to the minus 3. So you can integrate. And what we will get is 2/3 lambda to the 3/2. Okay, basically you have to first take the square root to convert it into lambda dot and then integrate. But let me write the formula anyway. So this determines lambda. Then you can substitute it here. And then the t dependence comes from this part. Okay, and you can extremize it. Okay, so that's the way you do it. But what is important, you see that when you do that substitution, the extremization doesn't depend on gamma. Okay, so the shape, so let me write this. So rho r of t has the form that this is gamma times some function of time. And this function of time, let me do this a little carefully. So let me check this. So this function of time is this quantity, right? So let me write this. So let's just check that this function has a sensible shape and maximum. So again, we see that f of tf is of course 0. And for large t, we can use the lambda of t goes as t to the 2/3. That's the matter dominated result, right? And so integral tf to t lambda t prime dt prime So this is proportional to T to the 5/3. So f of t, okay, if you use this, lambda t to the -4, so that goes as t to the power -8/3. And this integral goes as t to the 5/3. So t to the 5/3, that goes as t inverse. I think this is correct. So if we plot f versus t, you see, I'm just checking that this approximation, okay, gives a sensible function, okay, that it doesn't blow up in this approximation. So f versus t, so it starts at 0 again, and it falls off as 1 over t here. And so again, we see that it must have a maximum somewhere in between. So call this f max. And because f of t doesn't depend on gamma, okay, that's the way you have set up the approximation. F max is gamma independent. And rho r of t, then rho max of t, right? Rho of t max is proportional to gamma. Okay, because of this overall factor of gamma that is sitting here. Is this clear? So in this extreme case, okay, the radiation energy density reaches its maximum when the universe is still matter dominated. This may sound a little strange because after all, matter energy density is getting converted to radiation energy density. So how can the radiation energy density reach its maximum when it's still most of the energy density is in the matter? Okay. And the point is that both the radiation and the matter energy densities are also falling rapidly, okay, because of the expansion of the universe. Okay. So later on, more matter may get converted to radiation, okay, and it will because of this gamma factor. But by that time, the universe has already expanded so much, okay, that this 1 over lambda to the 4, okay, makes it smaller than what it was earlier. Okay. So this is a physics why in this case the maximum may be reached during radiation dominated, matter dominated era. Okay. And we see from here is the low gamma, okay, means inefficient reheating. Okay. Because the universe simply doesn't heat up that much to if the gamma is low, okay, because the rate at which the matter energy density is getting converted to radiation energy density remains small. Okay. So this can put possible bound on gamma, okay, again by demanding that the universe reheats to appropriate temperature. Okay. Now one can also use it the other way, right? Sometimes what may happen is the reheating temperature is too high, okay, then the microscopic physics produces particles or things that you don't want. So for that, it's necessary that the reheating is not very efficient. Okay, so in any given microscopic theory, you have to check that the reheating is exactly such that it does the things that you want it to do, but it doesn't do the things that you don't want it to. Are there questions?
Sir, I have a confusion. Sir, you said like gamma is very very low, like then Hubble expansion rate. So in that case, there will be only a scalar particle in the universe, no other standard model particle.
If gamma is exactly 0, okay? But as
Okay.
long as gamma is small but non-zero, there will be standard model particles produced. And
So-
we see that effect is captured here, that this maximum rho in radiation is proportional to gamma. So indeed, if gamma is exactly 0, then there will be no radiation at all.
Okay, so in a matter-dominated universe, like there will be some standard model particle.
Exactly. Right?
Okay.
There will be some radiation, right, which will behave like standard model particle, which will include the standard model particles. Eventually, of course, this matter energy density will be fully converted to radiation, right? Because even if gamma is small but finite, then for T larger than gamma inverse, it will get converted to radiation. but that will not heat up the universe that much.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Are there other questions? So let me emphasize again that it's not that the energy density will remain in matter. That will be, of course, be inconsistent with what we see. The energy density will eventually all get converted to radiation when the time becomes larger than gamma inverse. But by that time, the matter density might have diluted so much already that it doesn't help to make them into radiation. The maximum of the radiation energy density would have been reached earlier. Even though most of the energy density at that time was in matter, nevertheless, because lambda was small, the radiation energy density could have been large. Any other question? Okay, so this is as much as I'll say about reheating. So now we are going to start the discussion of fluctuations. So let me explain the puzzle, okay, which we have discussed already earlier, but let me remind you again. So inflation makes the universe very smooth. So given this, we can ask, how do fluctuations arise? So one possible answer is that it could be thermal fluctuations. But after all, okay, when the phi particle is decaying, okay, it's producing all this radiation, okay, which are moving around in the universe from one place to another. Okay. And during that point, during that radiation-dominated era, some energy density would have been carried around by these particles. Okay, so just by random motion, the particles would have produced some a little less, more energy density in one region and a little less energy density in the other region. So it could give rise to possible fluctuation. So the particles could, thermal particles, could carry energy densities from one region to another.
Sir, you don't mean this happens during equilibrium, right?
No, even in equilibrium. Even in equilibrium, right? The particles will carry around energy densities from one region to another, right?
Not on average.
Not on average, but on the average, there is a fluctuation. You know that if there are n particles, right, then the standard deviation goes as over root n.
Yeah.
So that is what you're talking about. Right? So on the average, no, but these fluctuations are small, right? So it's possible that these motions will produce some fluctuations. Is that okay? And that's what we mean by thermal fluctuation.
What do we mean by fluctuation exactly here? Not structure, right?
Well, what we mean is a CMB, the temperature in one region is a little higher than in another region, right?
You mean isotropically little higher, like angular in the angular sense?
average, of course, is average, but the temperatures have fluctuations in the CMB sky, 1 in 10 to the 5. And that's what you are asking. Okay, that so one possibility would be this. Okay? The thermal fluctuation, the particles just move around, carrying energy densities from here to there. On the average, the energy density should be uniform, okay? But it could give small fluctuations. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Any other question? But this has this feature, as we have seen several times by now, that such fluctuations can possibly, okay, I'm not saying that it does explain, can possibly explain fluctuations over horizon size scale. And here by horizon size, I specifically mean that computed after inflation. Okay, I'm going to make this more precise in a few minutes. Because we had seen that was the horizon problem, right? That the amount of distance that light can travel after inflation, because all these thermal fluctuations you're talking about is happening after inflation. So the amount of distance that light can travel, okay, is controlled by the horizon. And so if this fluctuation is happening because of the particles carrying energies from here to there, it can only explain fluctuations over the horizon size scale. In particular, this will mean that if we average, okay, so this, let me remind you, this is 2-degree angle on the last scattering surface. That was the size of the horizon at the time last scattering. So this in particular means that if we average the temperature over distances larger than the 2-degree angle on last scattering surface, we should get uniform result. Okay, because inflation had set the energy densities to be the same, and by moving things around, right, you can only create fluctuations over scales that is 2-degree or less, but not over scales that is larger than 2 degrees. Okay, you cannot carry energy from one end of the universe to another and make a cause fluctuation in that over that large scales. But this is not what you observe. So observed fluctuations, again, this is something that I'll make it more quantitative later, occur at all scales. Okay, in fact, this is what is called a scale invariant spectrum. Okay, I'll make this again precise later. Okay, which is also called the Harrison-Zeldovich spectrum. Okay. So we know that this is true by direct observation. We know that this is true by direct observation. But it has in fact predicted before even the CMB fluctuations are discovered. Okay. And the way it was predicted from the study of large scale structure. So basically the way you study this is you look at the kind of structure that you see in the universe, and then you can say that, okay, let's extrapolate back and see, okay, these structures of course have fluctuations, right? So let's extrapolate back and see what kind of fluctuations at the time of CMB of the last scattering could have produced what you see today. And just from that analysis, one could predict that you need nearly scale invariant spectrum. Okay, that means the fluctuations must occur at all scales. Okay, not just at less than 2 degree angle. So this is the puzzle. So the puzzle is how to generate fluctuations over large scales. Is this okay? Are there questions? So let me try to make this a little more quantitative. So let's recall the FRW metric. ds square as minus dt square. Okay, we had this at square times dr square plus r square d omega square. But I write at as a0 times lambda t. And then basically take this a0 inside. Okay, absorb the a0 factor inside this. So you define a0r as r. And you can write ds square as minus dt square plus lambda t square. So in this way of writing it, okay, this r measures distance in today's metric. Which is also called co-moving distance. This is the way I had defined it. Now let's consider some given epoch. Okay, and let's say one epoch is like the time over which it doubles, the universe size doubles. So here, if we define h of t, okay, as lambda dot over lambda, then roughly the universe doubles its size. Well, doubles is just a metaphor. It could be any multiple of itself, any finite multiple of itself. Its size over time scale h inverse. That is the significance of h. Okay, let me put the time dependence. So now you can ask the co-moving distance that the light travels during this time. So the co-moving distance traveled during this time Okay, I'll just try to make a rough estimate, not exact results, okay, which you had analyzed earlier. Okay. So use this fact that dr is dt over lambda t. Okay, because the light goes along null geodesic. Okay. So the change in r, which is the co-moving distance, okay, is 1 over lambda t times 1 over h of t. Okay, so over this distance. So let me write as a lambda inverse h inverse. Is this clear so far? So let's calculate this in different class of universes. Okay, radiation dominated, matter dominated, and cosmological constant dominated. So during inflation, lambda goes as some constant times e to the power ct. Okay? A and c constants. So lambda dot over lambda is c. Okay, that's h inverse. That's h. So h inverse lambda inverse is c inverse a inverse e to the power minus ct. So h inverse lambda inverse falls exponentially. Okay, so it falls exponentially. Okay, and let me remind you again that the significance of h inverse lambda inverse is that this is the co-moving distance that the light travels during this time. Okay. So this means that this gives that in a given epoch, okay, this is the scale over which you can produce perturbation. Okay, because this is the maximum distance light travels during this time. So any perturbation that you want to, any fluctuation that you want to produce, okay, can only occur over this scale. Okay. If you average over larger than this scale, it will not have any effect. Okay, that's the significance of this h inverse lambda inverse. Now during radiation dominated, here, lambda goes as, let's say, dt to the half. So h, which is lambda dot over lambda, is 1 over 2t, I think, 1 over 2t. So lambda inverse h inverse is b inverse h inverse is 1 over 2b and t to the half. Okay. So the important point is that h, this quantity lambda inverse h inverse actually increases with time. Okay, and we will see that this makes a difference. And this will be also the case for matter dominated. Matter dominated. Lambda is d t to the 2/3. And this you can check that here lambda inverse h inverse is 3/2 d inverse t to the 1/3. So still grows as a function of time. So what we are going to do now is to plot lambda inverse h inverse versus t. And what you see is that during inflation it falls exponentially, and then it starts growing. Once the universe enters radiation or matter dominated area, it starts growing. Okay, with some appropriate behavior, it changes from t to the half to 1/3 and so on. Okay, but that's not a very important part. So this is the end of inflation. Okay, this is the end of inflation. So let's suppose that we have some last scattering time, right? TLS. Let's call this TLS. Let's just draw this horizontal line. The significance will become clear. So let me remind you again, the lambda inverse H inverse gives you the distance scale over which you can, a given era can produce fluctuations. So now suppose that you're looking at fluctuations over this scale. Okay, this is the length, this is the, has a dimension of length, right? This is the distance. Suppose you're looking at fluctuations over this scale. So let's draw a horizontal line and see what it is saying. So what this is saying is that the fluctuations over this scale, over the scale R1, you see, it can be affected during inflation, okay, because lambda inverse H inverse was larger. In this era, the fluctuations over this scale cannot be affected by microscopic physics. So we say that the fluctuation, okay, so this point, we say is the point at which the fluctuations exited the horizon. And this point is, we say, is a re-entry point. Okay, where the fluctuations enter the horizon. So which means that between exit and re-entry, microscopic physics doesn't affect fluctuations over that scale. So if we consider a distance scale of this kind, then we see that the microscopic physics between T1 and TLS can affect fluctuations over length scale R1. Okay, so that's the significance of this diagram. So microscopic physics between T1 and TLS can affect fluctuations over scale R1. But let's suppose that we have a larger scale, R2. Here you see that it enters the horizon after the last scattering surface. So which basically means that the microscopic physics cannot affect fluctuations of this scale, okay, of scale R2, by the time last scattering takes place. So these fluctuations can only be affected by pre-inflationary era. So fluctuations at scale R2 can only be affected by physics during inflation. And you can perhaps guess that this R0, this is what gives this 2-degree angle on the last scattering surface. So what this is telling us is that the fluctuations at scale larger than R0 must have been produced during inflation, and they are not affected by the microscopic physics that happened after inflation. Okay, they exited the horizon during inflation, and they re-entered after the last scattering time. Okay, and hence they couldn't have affected the physics at the last scattering surface. So if we look at the fluctuations at on the last scattering surface that are larger than the scale R0. What this is saying is that these are directly giving us information about the physics during inflation, because these fluctuations would have been produced during inflation. So next time we'll see how these fluctuations can possibly be produced. But this picture shows that unless there is a mechanism by which you can produce these fluctuations during inflation, there is no way you could produce these during microscope after inflation. Okay, the microscopic physics after inflation couldn't produce these fluctuations. And this, of course, we had seen as horizon problem. Okay, there the problem was how it becomes so uniform, but it's the other side of the coin. What produced these fluctuations if inflation made everything smooth? Okay, so I think I'll stop here. Are there questions?
So would you clarify what fluctuations are we talking about? Fluctuations in the temperature or?
Yes, fluctuations in the temperature. Fluctuations in the CMB temperature, that if you average over larger than 2 degrees, you still see fluctuations. And the question is, where are those fluctuations coming from?
Oh, would you again, like over 2 degrees, if you what average?
Average. Suppose you take the average temperature over an angular patch that's much larger than 2 degrees.
Which is 2.73, the temperature that we want.
Yeah, that's the average temperature, of course, right? But as we look at the microwave background, microwave radiation coming from different directions of the sky, right? You see that there is small fluctuations in the temperature, 1 in 10 to the 5, right? It's not that the radiation coming from all directions have exactly the same temperature. That's the fluctuation in the microwave background temperature, and that shows that there are some inhomogeneities at the last scattering. Okay, the universe was not completely homogeneous. Because then if it was completely homogeneous, you'd have seen exactly the same temperature from in all directions, right? So that's the fluctuation you are talking about. And what you are saying is that if the fluctuations occur only at scales less than 2 degrees, we could produce it, we could interpret this as if they are being produced by thermal fluctuations after inflation. Okay, during this time, right? At scale R1, for example, this is less than 2 degrees. Okay, the thermal fluctuation during this time would have produced these small differences in temperature that you see. Yeah, this is true in an ideal gas, right? If you measure the temperature very accurately inside a box, you will not see exactly the same temperature everywhere, right? There is a root n fluctuation, okay, or 1 over root n fractional fluctuation. And that's the kind of fluctuation you're talking about here. So fluctuations during this time, okay, would have the thermal fluctuation would have produced some effect, but at scale R2, thermal fluctuation will not have any effect, right? Which means if you look at the average at scales larger than R0, say R2 is 10 degrees, right? You calculate averages over 10 degree angles. Then they should be uniform. Okay, of course, they'll not be exactly uniform, but it should fall off rapidly. And that's not what you see in the CMB. And that's what you want to explain. And what we are saying is that that kind of fluctuation can only be produced by physics during inflation. Is that point clear?
You only mean that fluctuations during the inflation can expand to such a large scale. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So here I have fixed. See, this is a co-moving distance, right?
Yeah.
So in the co-moving distance, okay, nothing is expanding. Okay, the universe is expanding, but of course, co-moving distance doesn't change, right? The physical fluctuation, of course, is getting stretched, right, because of the expansion of the universe. So there is another way of drawing this diagram where you plot physical distances. But this is easier because in the co-moving distance, a given fluctuation, once it's produced, the scale gets frozen, right? And what we are saying is that inflation can produce, if inflation produces fluctuations at scale R2, that will not be affected by the microscopic physics after inflation at the time of last scattering, right? After the time of last scattering, it may get affected, right? But the last scattering sees the image of the universe at that time. Was that your question? Is that clear, or you are?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I thought any small fluctuation can propagate to some distance and it can be enlarged. Just because those fluctuations are propagated, even in co-moving frame.
Yeah, but that is said by the horizon scale, right? That's what this is telling us. This lambda inverse, H inverse tells us how far can they propagate.
Any fluctuation that is being produced during last scattering or even before that, not during the inflation, cannot propagate to very large distances.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So if there is a fluctuation over a very large distance, then that cannot be explained by these small fluctuations propagating.
Yeah.
So this curve, right, that we see is telling us how far the fluctuations can propagate. Right. And indeed, here we see that the fluctuations over this scale, R1 scale, right, can be affected because the fluctuations can propagate over R1 scale in this region. Here, this curve is lower, right? So that means the distance over which it can propagate is less than R1.
Yeah. So in that during that time, the fluctuation size is actually decreasing.
Fluctuation size.
Yeah. I mean, the radius of fluctuation, let's say.
The radius,
The radius over which the fluctuation is present.
that's what we call R, right?
Yeah. So between exit and re-entry,
Yes,
that fluctuation is not increasing.
that radius. No, because that's just a red shift, right? A given wavelength is going to stretch. I mean, we'll make this precise by working in a momentum space. But if you think of a fluctuations of a given momentum, right, or given wavelength, that gets red shifted, but in the co-moving distance, it remains fixed. Right? The physically it gets stretched, of course, right? But the co-moving size of the fluctuation remains fixed because of the scaling by lambda.
Yeah, I'm talking about a co-moving distance. Yeah.
So co-moving distance remains fixed.
Yeah.
Right? Except for this distance, right? Except that, I mean, you can propagate a little bit, right? Because of the propagation of light. But as long as this is smaller, it cannot really propagate, right? So the co-moving distance remains fixed.
Yeah, and it seems like the light ray has, I mean, stuck to a point. I mean, I don't know.
What today has? No,
I mean, if it is not propagating,
yes.
then I mean, at least in the co-moving frame, it would seem like it has, it remains at least stuck there. I mean, I don't know.
Yes, yeah, like imagine that you have produced a sinusoidal wave. Okay.
Yeah, so it would look like it is at rest in the co-moving frame.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. As I said, it's not strictly true, of course, because it can propagate over this distance, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But as long as this distance is smaller, right, it is frozen in the co-moving frame.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what this is saying.
So here the time t1 of re-entry is exactly what the time at which the fluctuation should be made in some sense.
No. Time t1 by definition is this one. You fix a scale of fluctuations, right? That you look for averages over these distances, R1. You do average temperatures over distance R1 and you see if they fluctuate or not. Okay? So R1 you fix, right? So wherever this cuts this line, that's what is called, we call T1.
Yeah, but what does that mean?
Yeah, so the significance is that the microscopic physics can start affecting fluctuations over scale R1 after T1. That's the significance of this time T1.
Sorry, your voice got cut. Could you repeat that?
That the microscopic physics can produce fluctuations at distance of order R1 after the time T1. Why? Because after
Yes,
the time,
at time T1, some process may happen that produces a fluctuation at the scale of R1 in today's metric.
yeah, after time T1, between
Yeah.
T1 and TLS. Right?
Yeah.
So significantly before time T1, microscopic physics cannot produce fluctuations at scale R1. Right? Because lambda inverse H inverse is smaller, right?
Sir, as we can say for inflation produced in during fluctuation produced in during inflation. So after the last scattering surface, like TLS, then microscopic physics can affect the fluctuation that produced during inflation.
Yeah. So if the fluctuation was produced during inflation, right? Okay, whether it's aware or not, we don't know yet. Right? But imagine there are some fluctuations produced during inflation. Then those fluctuations could be affected between the time T1 and TLS for fluctuations over scale R1. That's what this is saying. So
Okay.
this is a special, this I have drawn because what you are seeing in CMB is the fluctuation at the time of last scattering. That's why TLS is important. Okay, because that's what we see in the CMB. And here what we see is that if we consider a distance scale R1, then after time T1, this lambda inverse H inverse becomes larger than R1. So thermal fluctuations could propagate over distances larger than R1. Right? And that's why it can start getting affected. Okay? Even if there is no fluctuation over this scale earlier, it can be produced by thermal fluctuation after this. But if there is no fluctuation over this scale earlier, it couldn't be produced by thermal fluctuation by the time of last scattering. Because thermal fluctuation can only produce, say at this time, right, at the time of last scattering, the thermal fluctuation can only produce fluctuations up to size R0, but not larger than that. Is that point clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if it's confusing, maybe tomorrow we can discuss it again, right? You think about this a bit, right? And tomorrow we'll go through this again and see if there are further questions.
So just one last clarification. This time is not the time at which the microscopic physics happens to create the fluctuation.
No, that we are not saying, right? Even though it could, right? After T1, the microscopic physics is able to create fluctuation. Right? And if it is able to create fluctuation, that means earlier fluctuations it could affect, right? It could add to the earlier fluctuations. But we are not saying that this is the time the microscopic, the fluctuations are first produced, right? Microscopic physics can add to the fluctuations after time T1. That's what you are saying. But here the microscopic physics couldn't have added anything to fluctuations at scale R2.
Sir, after TLS also.
After TLS, it doesn't matter because you're not observing what's happening after TLS, right? After TLS, it can, right? After this time, the microscopic physics can affect the fluctuations, but we are seeing CMB at type TLS, right? CMB tells us how the state of the universe was at the time TLS. And that's why TLS is important. Right? If the microscopic physics affects fluctuations after this time, right, then it's not something that you see in CMB spectrum. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anyway, so think about this and maybe tomorrow we can discuss this again because this part is maybe confusing. But it's important to understand this because eventually, I mean, if you want to understand the origin of fluctuations, one should know that what the late time microscopic physics can do to the fluctuations. Okay, so then we will continue tomorrow with this. So I'm stopping now.